Hello and welcome to Seattle City Makers. I'm your host, Jon Scholes. Good to have you here for our latest episode, everybody. It's a real treat to sit down with Steve Raible, the longtime voice of the Seattle Seahawks. Of course, a player before that, started with the expansion team in 1976. And a longtime news anchor at KIRO TV from 1993 until his retirement in 2020. He is a Seattle institution, and we cover a lot of ground. His career with the Hawks in the 70s, his transition to the color commentator role for the team when he was just 28, his perspective on how the game has changed since his time as a player, some of the new rule changes coming to the NFL this year and his take on those, his take on the team and the roster, the new coaching staff, how he approaches his broadcast and play-by-play for the Hawks, and much more. It was just a delight to have spent some time with Steve. I think you'll enjoy this conversation. He is really generous with his efforts in the community and his time with us today on the podcast. And it's appropriate to have this conversation as the Seahawks are back in action. Football's back, both the NFL and college. A great time of year. Hope you enjoy my conversation with Seahawks great, play-by-play caller, and all-around terrific individual and Seattleite, Steve Raible. So thanks for making time for this, Steve.
Pleasure.
And it is serendipitous that we're having this conversation a couple hours after cut day down at the VMAC.
Yeah. The
team going from, 90 players in training camp to 53 man roster.
Yeah.
You were saying just a second ago off when we weren't recording, some of the cuts that surprised you.
And they always do. There's always a couple
that
are out there that catch you by surprise a little bit. The difference now is oftentimes these guys aren't gone for long. You know, they're gone for one day.
They figure out how to get them back.
And they bring them right back to the practice squad. They have to clear waivers. But remember, there's 1,200 other guys that just got released by teams. So the pool of talent out there is great. And your tendency is to bring back the guys who now have been with you all of training camp and know your system.
And you know them.
Yeah. So, and you know what's interesting? And we talked about it this weekend. We had a meeting. We do a production meeting before the games at end of the week. And we talked to Mike and a couple of the players, but John Schneider came in and sat down. And John is great. So John I've known since the day he walked in the door, and we've been really great friends. And he opens up a little bit sometimes, but this he wanted everybody to know. And we talked about it on our pregame show as well. And that is when they go into how they put their roster together, it's not like you see on Hard Knocks or like when I played, bring your playbook, and then, here, give it to the coach. Coach tells you, hey, good job, nice job. Now here's a roadmap and an apple. Get out of here. And that's not what it is like at all today. Today, these guys are, hey, this is just how we're assembling the roster. And right now, you may not be on the 53, but by tomorrow, you very well are going to be on the practice squad. And if not, here is how you stay in shape. Here is all the information you need. Here's our trainer. Here's our this. Here's our that.
We're going to keep you close.
And keep you close by because tomorrow somebody's out with an injury. So he thinks in terms of 100 guys. That's what our roster looks like. The 53 plus the 17 if you have an international prospect, which we do. And then the guys who are then kind of said, stay close, go home, but do not stop doing what you're doing. Work out, be ready, because tomorrow we could call you. We lose another cornerback and we're down a couple of guys. We're going to need you. So and they tailor it to those guys. The communication that they have today, guys are more sophisticated than we were almost 50 years ago when I came up. And so you have to talk to them differently. And I venture to say that business is the same way. You can't say what you said to guys 50 years ago in the office and expect to get away with that today. You have to figure out how best to communicate with these employees. So A, you get the best out of them, but B, because they want to do the best for you. So it's a really great concept, and not a lot of teams do it that way, but the Seahawks do.
And I was gonna ask you, do you recognize this game and this business today from when you played 50 years? Is it so different in how they practice and train and retain? And I mean, does it And you've been around it the whole time, but as a player, you know, that was a few years ago.
Yeah, for a while, I used to go home and visit my folks back in Kentucky, and I used to joke about smacking my dad when I got home for not having me later in life, so I could take part in some of what's going on today in the league. No, what I don't recognize is the money. What I don't recognize is the pressure that social media puts on young players.
Right.
And they've grown up with it now. The guys who were kind of on that bubble 10, 12 years ago, 14 years ago when this stuff first started happening and couldn't quite get the idea of, you know, everything I say.
Some of them are still figuring it out.
Exactly. Right? Is forever here etched in stone. So you might want to be careful, even if you delete it. Like drop your phone in a can of root beer, it's still going to be there. So those kind of things are different. But the basics of the game are still the same. I mean, our schemes were maybe less exotic as they have now, but the idea of running down, catching a pass, breaking a tackle, scoring a touchdown, blocking the guy that's in front of you, or making the tackle if you're on defense, those things never change.
How many days a week were you practicing in pads, full contact versus
what's
allowed today?
Well, I'll tell you training camp first. Our very first training camp, a little unusual because it was the beginning of the team in 1976. And we reported to Cheney, Washington at Eastern Washington University. And we had 2 practices a day. Morning was shoulder pads and shorts. Afternoon was full pads. And you hit every single day. We scrimmaged almost every day. We'd vary it between, you know, out in the middle of the field, you know, down in distance situations and goal line, but we'd still hit and tackle every day. And that first training camp started about July the, 8th or 9th maybe. And we had 6 preseason games. So we didn't break camp until the end of August. And we came over here and then stayed at Seattle U for 2 more weeks until the final roster was set. And it just seemed interminable. And there were I think we had 1 off day. We had a family barbecue or something, and all the players are too tired to eat. You know, we're tired. Just give me a beer and let me go sit down.
Take a lawn chair.
Oh my God! And now you only have a certain number of practices. The mornings have to be walkthroughs, but you can still get a lot done. A lot of teaching, and that's one of the things that this guy Mike McDonald he is a real stickler on that. About attention to the details, about efficiency on the field, and certainly about learning. Yeah. When you have that opportunity, you can't not do that. And the guys oftentimes who are not here are guys that just had a difficult time in, you know, understanding what we tried to do or to make that snap decision of how do I convert what I know to what I need to do here on the field. And you know, this game doesn't wait for you. You don't have a lot of time to develop in this game. You better be ready to play, or there's somebody else who's ready to go.
And a lot of changes made to address player health and safety, and for good reasons, right? There's a lot of evolution in the game that's important.
Having been a member of the concussion club 101 in the NFL.
You had a few?
I had a few, going back to college days.
Yeah.
So it is, interestingly enough, so I just turned 70 this summer, and interestingly, it's one of those things that now you start thinking about. You know, how will it manifest itself? How will it show itself? Sharon is my wife, of now 43 years, a little concerned about that, and well, she should be. We know a lot of people. We know a lot of guys who I played with, guys who I played against. I had a conversation with Dan Fouts, not this training camp, but last training camp. He lost 5 of his teammates in 1 year, and 4 of them were CTE. So that tells you how A, rough it was, and B, how we didn't really know what we didn't know back then, and how much more they know now, which is a great reason why they don't hit anymore in practice, or very little, why they wear those goofy little bonnets on their heads, because it helps cushion that brain shake inside the helmet. There's lots of, as you said, really smart things that they're doing now.
So is this your favorite time of year as we approach the kickoff of both the college football season this weekend, Labor Day weekend, and then the NFL shortly to follow? I guess college kicked off
with Georgia
Tech and
winning
Florida State
against Florida State, the number 10 team in the nation. Go Wreck.
Yep. Your Georgia
Go Jackets.
Tech. Yep. Yellow Jackets.
I thought after the first drive it was going to be a long, long walk down the plank into the Irish Sea, but no, they ended up playing great. Yeah, I guess it is. It is my favorite time of year, fall.
This is the greatest month, well, September as we approach it, of the year, Steve, right?
It is.
In Seattle.
Yeah, I think
we're the best weather. Can we just agree on this?
Yes.
Abundance of sports.
Although interesting the way we've kind of had this,
this pre-fall.
Yeah, but we'll have people ask me, and I said, no, we'll be good till like almost the second week, maybe even the third week. It'll still be nice in October. But I said September will be great. Don't worry about it.
Yeah,
and
we're counting on it because we're hosting this big conference in a couple of weeks. And all our colleagues. So we told them it's not going to rain.
Well, and then in a few years from now, you're going to have the whole world here.
That's right.
And you'd prefer it doesn't rain then.
Yeah. So you're with me. September's the best.
I got to say September. And besides, Sharon likes it because she looks better in fall clothes. She's always said that.
We all like wearing fall clothes around here. I think it's part of what makes us
Seattleites.
You're in shorts.
I'm in shorts and an old polo shirt. And this is now, when you retire.
This is your uniform.
This is it. I will wear shorts until the end of October. I don't care if we have snow.
You can't wear those on air, can you? Because you stand up.
I used to.
Did you?
I used to. When I didn't have to stand up, I'd have shorts on. If it was a hot day. Or we had a softball team. I'd already have my cleats and my softball pants on, sitting next to Gary Justice, who also had his softball pants on. And then as soon as the gig was over, we'd run out and go play softball for the KIRO team.
So let's talk more about this season and the Hawks. What's your take on new coaching staff, a lot of new players? What's your outlook, perspective on the team?
Well, I can't say anything without first saying how wonderful it was all those years to work with Pete. Mm-hmm. I've been blessed to have been there since the first day, so I've seen every single coach and general manager and ownership group come through.
Is there anybody that's been around this team longer than you?
Officially, like me, no, I don't think so. There's some guys with the organization. Eric Kennedy, the equipment guy, he's been there 30 plus years or something. Gary Wright, who is still in town. Gary is working with the World Cup group here, and he was our PR guy forever, and then worked with the Sounders after that. He still has a little hand in some things, but no, as far as being officially part of what the team does on a weekly basis, it'll be 50 years, not this season, but next season will be 50 years as a franchise. So I'm just, knocking on wood, hang on for just that long. My nephew Riley does stats for us. I told him, if you have to, just wheel me into the booth, point me in the right direction, stick the microphone under my chin, and let's go if I need that kind of help. But I'm going to get to 50 one way or another. All that said, Pete is a terrific coach and person. And this young guy, he reminds me of Pete in some ways, and then he's very different from Pete. First of all, they're both defensive coaches. But they're both very, very much attention to detail. They're both teachers. I learned about the teaching part actually under Mike Holmgren, how much teaching coaches have to do. He always prided himself. He said, I'm a teacher first. He was a high school history teacher before he ever really got into coaching. So it is important because you have a lot of information that you have to impart on young guys, some of whom don't want to hear very much about it. They just want to go out and play. And your job is to let them know, no, we have a way of doing it, and you better learn how to do it.
They come in, think they've got it figured out. But
you don't know what you don't know and until these guys teach you. So I like this guy. I like Mike. He's got a kind of a wry sense of humor, very, very serious when he needs to be serious. He's got a bunch of teachers who are good coaches. I can't wait to see what Ryan Grubb is going to do, the offensive coordinator. What he did at UW was almost unheard of. And so if he can have that kind of, or even remotely that kind of success with the Seahawks against, yes, arguably much better defenses than he saw at times in college football, but he's so smart and he's so creative. And then Mike you've probably heard this story from John Schneider. When we played Baltimore last year in Baltimore, and they just beat the tar out of us. I mean,
it was a physical game.
Physical. They were places we didn't even know to look for them. So we all come out of the locker room up a tunnel, and we're kind of waiting by the buses. We're having a bite to eat before we get on the buses and fly all the way across country after getting your butt handed to you. And John has told this story that several of the offensive linemen came up to him after the game and said, I don't know what just happened. Where did those guys come from? We had no idea. I mean, they were all over Geno. I mean, it was just a train wreck. That's the kind of defense that Mike McDonald and AD
tenacious
is gonna have out there this season. And so I'm excited about all that. I really am. And it's good for you. Change sometimes refreshes everybody. It also makes your veterans understand that, hey, I got no history with this guy. I got to go out here and work hard. I probably have been doing it anyway, but I need to work hard or harder. And for those of us sort of in the organization, we have to prove ourselves as well, even though Jon and Chuck, all those guys are still there.
Yeah.
But still, it's interesting to change, and it's been a great thing within the organization.
How's the vibe around the team, the energy, the culture shifted? What's different that you're picking up at VMAC and in the locker room and just being around the players and coaches?
Yeah, not a different vibe. I mean, Pete always had these guys ready to go. I mean, they were always ready to play, and the excitement level and all of that. If there's anything that's different in my estimation, it's listening to the guys talk about how new some of the schemes are. When you hear Geno, who's been around, 12 years or something, when you hear him say, we're running plays I've never seen before, that's a pretty good indication that somebody's is pretty creative on the offensive side. And likewise with defense, demanding things of players that wasn't asked of them before. Know what all the guys around you are doing, because everything you do is related to how it fits with what they're doing, as opposed to just, here's your job, pin your ears back, go do it. It's a much more cerebral exercise, but that and part of that has to do with then you have to physically pay it off. You got to go make the play when you have the opportunity, and you can't make the mistakes. One of the things that Mike said the other day after the game, so we win, nice win over Cleveland, but he was more focused on what we did in the second half. He said, we made too many mistakes, too many penalties, gave up too many big third downs. Said, we gave up 33 points. He said, we can't win giving up 33 points. So we'll have to be better than that. Now, our starters played pretty well, but we got to figure out who the guys are that are going to be behind the starters, because they very well could be called on tomorrow.
So speaking of penalties, a couple of rule changes going into the season. The kickoff is one.
Yep.
I was just reading about this that it wasn't on my radar. I've been watching a lot of preseason football, but I want to get your take on these. The hip drop tackle. Yeah. Are you following this thing?
Yeah.
This looks like it's going to be a complete nightmare.
I don't know. I really am not sure how you really officiate that.
This just looks like a tackle to me. Does it look like a tackle to you?
Yeah. And don't ever have Dave Lyman up here, because he'll throw stuff through the windows. He'll take this stool and break stuff. I know what they're trying to do, and it's the same thing they've tried to do with outlawing the horse collar tackle.
Yeah, that one's pretty clear.
Yeah,
you can see that.
Yeah,
right?
Hip tackle. I mean, you know it when you see it. The problem is trying to get a defender who is, as Dave likes to say, it's tough to defy the laws of gravity.
Yeah.
You reach out, you grab a guy, he's ahead of you, you start to fall down. What's back there? His legs. And so necessarily you oftentimes fall on the back of his legs.
Yeah.
It's kind of what they're looking for, I think, is hip drop is when you're actually starting a roll. You drop your hips into the tackle and try to roll into the guy. And that's what they're trying to eliminate, because you can destroy a guy's knees, and it happens so often.
Yeah.
We saw Chen Nwosu get chop blocked the other night. They outlawed that several years ago. It still happens. When guys, he's in contact with one person, somebody else comes and tries to cut him. That used to be the coin of the realm back in the day. That's how you stood up a defensive end and then cut him down, and it was perfectly legal. So it's not anymore. That's a good thing.
Yeah, this is going to make
and the kickoff, by the way, is turning out to be really interesting.
I think you need a PhD to understand the kickoff rule adjustment.
The more
I was watching
see
the explainer video that the NFL has produced, and
it's
you got to watch it four or five times.
Yes, it's easier to just watch the game, and and then you get a pretty good sense of it. The idea is twofold: A, to reduce injuries again with guys running 60 yards, full speed, guys starting way back here running full speed at them.
Because the injury average on kickoffs much higher than from the line of scrimmage, right?
Generally.
That's what the NFL's trying to get at is.
Yeah. And the guys who were running the ball have a head start, or, they get up ahead of steam from the goal line. Now they're running full speed, and they're generally contacting people around the 20, 25, 30-yard line, putting your head and shoulder pads down the way you were taught to do when you've been playing football since you were this big, and then you run into somebody else's helmet, and that's when two guys get knocked out. So I know what they're trying to do as far as the injury situation and safety, and I get that. And it's actually kind of interesting to watch. It's almost like a scrimmage play as opposed to what it used to be, the kickoff. Because you got, a defensive line that's lined up back here at their own 30 or 20, whatever it is, 30. And then at the 35, here is the coverage team.
Yep.
And nobody
Staring
can
right
leave.
at each other.
Exactly. Nobody can leave till the ball's kicked. And now your kicker can do some different things. I talked to Jason Myers, our kicker, a couple of times during pregame warm-ups. He says, he said, I just have to think about kickoffs oftentimes now in a completely different way. He said, I've had to revert back to some of the soccer stuff I used to do when he was a soccer player in high school. He said, because those are the kinds of kicks that you're looking for. You want to get it up high, but you want to drop it in this one spot. You want to give your guys a chance to get under it. If you kick a line drive, you better make sure that it's off the ground, because if it hits before the 20-yard line, the landing zone, the ball comes out to the 40. So there's a lot of reasons why you need to be very precise about this stuff. So, it's just one more new thing for everybody to learn, and that's okay.
Well, I predict this hip drop tackle rule will supersede the debate over what the hell pass interference is and isn't in the NFL. We're going to be talking about what the hell's a hip drop tackle.
Yeah. What's interesting? We got, to my knowledge, I know it hasn't happened in any of the Seahawks games, not a single call, hip drop tackle.
Yeah.
So I sort of thought during preseason games, the officials were kind of letting things go just a little bit. I think once the regular season starts, they're going to start clamping down, and then you'll see some of this stuff. And then coaches on the sidelines will be standing there with their arms outstretched like this. What are we doing? Just what we did in training camp. Well, we hope that you guys would fix it yourselves, but since you didn't, here's my nice yellow flag. Get back on your sidelines.
Yeah. So you made the transition to broadcasting, at 28 years old? Is that right?
Something like that. And I retired in 82, right before training camp.
I was reading this article from the Ellensburg Daily Record.
Oh, Lord.
We do our research around here. From 1980.
My God.
And I was struck by this quote. It says, anybody that comes in, this is from you, anybody that comes into the game thinking that it's an end rather than a means to an end is kidding themselves. And I was surprised how sort of thoughtful you were around, what's your next thing? And that seems not what most guys are thinking coming into the league. Like, they made it to the NFL. They're going to be in the NFL. They're going to have long careers. They're going to be successful. They want to win a Super Bowl. But it seems like early on in your career, you were seeing this as a springboard. And I think there's another quote in this article where you use that term.
Yeah.
Where did that come from? Is that an accurate sort of assessment of?
When I came in, yes, absolutely. When the guys are coming in now, some of them really don't have to worry. I mean, if they do it right, because of the money.
Yeah.
Guys are even.
What was your first contract? Can we ask you what you were making?
You absolutely can. 1976, second round. I was a bonus pick in the second round. Something like that. Sherman Smith and I were bonus picks together in the second round. And we had the same agent. So basically, he just negotiated the same contract for both of us. 3-year contract, 27, 35, 43. That's $1,000. So the third year in the league, I was only making $43,000. And then we had a $45,000 signing bonus, but it was split up over 3 years, so $15,000 each year. And then when Uncle took his 6 out of it, I had enough to put a down payment on a car. And then here we go. And so you're basically going paycheck to paycheck like most Americans do. And yet that was more money than I had ever seen, obviously, in my life. And I thought it was great, and I lived fine. I had a little apartment in Kirkland right by our practice facility for my first, 3 years or 4 years. And then Sharon and I got married. We built a house in Bellevue, and then we've moved half a dozen times since then. But I didn't know any better, and I thought that was great money. But it also I knew guys who had played for maybe a year and then were out, or I knew guys who went to training camp. Georgia Tech wasn't exactly a feeder school into the NFL, not like Georgia is today, University of Georgia, or certainly even Washington or Michigan State, Notre Dame, those guys. And so I always knew that this was not going to be something that I would do forever. Mm-hmm. I loved to play football. My actual first love was track. I was a track guy. I was a sprinter. And I loved the fact that I could do that by myself. I didn't need to have other guys to depend on, except for the relays. But football was a great opportunity for me because I got a great education. I got a scholarship to Georgia Tech, fabulous school, got my degree in 4 years, and then came out here and realized that, yeah, this is the best of the best in this league, so I better have some things that I like to do. It's interesting. I took a course at Georgia Tech, I think my senior year, and it was I was a management major, industrial management, and it was called Management by Objectives. I don't know why I called it that, but we did a lot of, for corporate purposes. So everything from how do you build a workday, what does that look like, to building out your plan for the company over the next year. And so, you're moving pieces around, and how do I plan, how do I schedule, how do I do all these things? And our professor on the first day said, okay, we're going to do this little exercise about doing a flow chart. And I want you to do it on something so do it on yourself. Start with your birth date. Don't get into every detail. And when I was 2, I did it. But he said, just make a chart, a graph of where to get to here, and then where you're going after that. And so mine kind of followed along, and there were 2 branches off of mine. One was football, actually 3 branches. One was business, one was broadcasting. Strangely enough, I found kind of that I was interested in it even back then. I'd heard David Brinkley speak at Georgia Tech 1 year, and he just fascinated me. I was so interested, so enthralled about how they told stories and what was important about what they did every day. Tech didn't have a journalism school, so I did everything I could do, writing. I took Shakespeare courses just to understand how to write and syntax and all those things. Anyway, at the bottom of this thing, there were like several outcomes, one of which was, professional player, coach / scout. One was in the legal profession, business law. The other one was broadcasting, and at the bottom of that was news anchor. And that was in 1970 that I put that together, 74 maybe. And I still have the piece of paper. I have it at home. And it's amazing whether I predetermined, and just followed it just because I'm too dumb to figure out anything else, or whether I really thought that this was where I wanted to go and this is what I wanted to do. But I ended up following it, and so here we are, 50 years later.
This article describes that you were getting opportunities for personal appearances and stints as a guest host on local television talk shows while you were a player. Yep. It also says a good-looking, well-spoken graduate of Georgia Tech. Raible has become a familiar face.
All that was true. All that's Seattle. Absolutely true.
So how did you get those opportunities as a second-string receiver playing behind?
Thanks for reminding me, John.
Playing behind the other Steve.
That's right. That's right.
Like how did that come about?
I was his food taster for 6 seasons. I think part of it was we as a team, led by a guy named Norm Evans, who was our first captain. He was our offensive tackle. He came from Miami. He was part of the 72 undefeated Miami Dolphins team under Don Shula. So he was a great player, and we got him at the end of his career. But we had a big team meeting one day, and he said, guys, I just want to tell you, we did this in Miami. We're going to do it here. He said, we've invited the folks from United Way to come in and give us their spiel about how important what they do in the community is. And he said, I'm just here to tell you, we're going to be the best team in the NFL at contributing in the community. We don't care what you do, but we are going to do this. And he kind of gave everybody that put that on the table for us all. Jump ahead now to Gary Wright, who we were talking about a few moments ago, a longtime friend who was in the front office of the Seahawks back then. They used to get tons of requests for people to come speak. And so they'd come downstairs and say, hey, there's a couple of scout troops that are meeting in Kirkland or something. on your day off, which was Tuesday, the only day off we had during the week. Are you interested in doing that? And, well, I can't do it this Tuesday. And we have something else. And then pretty soon they went from scout troops to business groups to Boeing employees groups. And you start to develop a style. You start to develop what do I want to say? How do I say it? You start to be able to think on your feet, which is something you need in this business, the TV radio business, whether it's football or breaking news. And they just kept giving me opportunities. And so I just kept taking them. I did everything that I could do and didn't get paid for it. Did it then, those led to some commercials, which I did, and I did get paid for those. And that's kind of how it started. The stuff I did locally was some of it was at King TV. There's a show called Seattle Today back before either of you guys were even here. And it was like a 2-hour morning show, 9 to 11 or something like that. And so the host, great story, the host was going to be gone. This was in July, so we're still at home, actually the end of June. The male host, male and female, was going to be gone on vacation. I had done several shows and sports things on King 5. Before that, their producers saw me and said, hey, would you like to come in and co-host for a day? I said, well, I don't know that I can make room for just a day. And he said, well, you want to come in and do a week? And it turned out to be—
And you're playing at this time?
It was before training camp.
Yeah.
But my week started 2 days after we got married. So there goes, we weren't exactly going to take a long honeymoon, but we were going to take off and go someplace. And I had to tell Sharon, no, I'm going to spend it in a TV studio learning how to do this job. And she said, well, okay. And so we did, and that turned out to be so much fun, and I learned so much there. And then did the radio stuff with Wayne Cody for years, did Sportsline. And so just was, again, kind of just given opportunities, and you either sink or swim. And they let me learn the opportunity to become the play-by-play guy. I'm sure they had a list as long as my arm of guys who they thought would be really great for this job. And there was a list that long of people who wanted to come here and do that job in 2004 when it became available. Gary Wright, to his credit, said, I think Steve, he was talking to Mike Holmgren at the time and our general manager, and ultimately this went all the way up to the team president and Paul Allen. We think that he can do this job. They also had the opportunity to sign Warren Moon as the analyst, and we knew Warren, his first year of eligibility for the Hall of Fame was going to be 2005, and he was a shoo-in for the Hall of Fame. So how great would it be to have a Hall of Fame guy as your analyst? So they gave me the chance to learn, and Warren and I sat in a darkened room, way smaller than this, over at the old practice facility in Kirkland with a TV about a third the size of that grease board behind you, and just we ran game film over and over, and we just practiced. Sound off. And we just practiced. Yeah. We just worked at it.
What was the hardest part of the transition from the analyst role to
not doing the analyst job?
Really?
And I still have to catch myself
to shut up.
To let Dave say what happened, because that's his job now. But as Dave told somebody when he was doing TV one year for preseason, and we had a couple of different guys fill in on the analyst job, and they asked him, so what should we know? And Dave said, just remember this, Raible can do your job and his job. So make sure you're adding to the broadcast, when you go in there. And that was the toughest part, was just kind of learning to let the game come to me and understand that you don't have to be a half a second ahead. You can be a second behind because this is not seen. People are listening to us. And so that's one of the things I've learned. And now I've learned how to adjust everything from my volume, because I can get pretty loud. You keep it kind of moving. You don't ever keep it on a continuum. You move it up and down, and knowing what you're doing, preparing for the game also, knowing who the guys are, knowing what their skills are, knowing, since I know football, how to explain what just happened, and then let Dave say why it happened or why it didn't work. And it's just kind of worked out. And I tell this to people, and they get crazy, they get sick of hearing it. I know Sharon does, but I just say I really am blessed every day. When I can't tell you how lucky I've been to get here to Seattle, to play football in the National Football League, to meet a gal who is now put up with me for 43. Actually, we dated for 2 years, so 45, 44 years. To get into a business where I was for almost 40 years. I've been pretty lucky. And then I still get to do football.
Yeah.
So, and to do it in a city like this, to be here. I mean, I could have ended up a lot of places. The Packers were really interested in me when I came out. And I would have loved to play for Green Bay. Yeah. Because they were my team when I was growing up. But the opportunities in Green Bay, Wisconsin aren't near what they have been here in Seattle, Washington. So I've just been really lucky that way.
You've talked a little bit about your approach to calling the game as an analyst. Are there certain principles or rules, approaches that that you still take today, or is so much of it just intuitive because you've done it for so long? I mean, some of them I know of. You say touchdown Seahawks, you don't say the player's name immediately.
Exactly.
You stand a lot. Are you standing the whole game?
Most of the time I do.
Is that just because there's not room?
That's part of it.
Yeah,
the booths are so
booth.
tight these days. In the booth down here at Lumen, I have a higher chair, something like this stool I'm on right now, if you guys could picture it out there. And it gets me up a little bit so I can see what I want to see, but I don't have to stand the whole time. But in a lot of opposing stadiums, I stand the whole game. And it helps with energy, obviously. It keeps you kind of moving around. My feet hurt by the time the game is over, but my feet hurt all the time anyway from sports all these years. The other couple of things I learned, I figured out early on, saying something like "holy catfish" would not get me thrown off the air, and like if I said "holy crap" or something like that, which I really am not supposed to do.
And I know you've been asked a couple thousand times now where "holy catfish" came from, but we'll ask it for those that don't know, so you can explain.
And I wish I could give you a better explanation.
You don't have
a. One of my best friends in the world out here. He's got family down in North Carolina, and then I went to school at Georgia Tech. So I had teammates who came from like way outside of Macon, Georgia, and Gainesville, Georgia. I mean, so far out in the country they had to pump in sunlight. That's how far these guys were. And so I'm sure that these guys brought those kind of sayings to Georgia Tech, and I'm sure I heard stuff like that from my buddy. And it just kind of one day it just sort of hit me, and I just said it. And I think it was Warren who was in the booth at the time, and he kind of looked at me, holy catfish. And it sounded good. And now it's become such a moniker for me, at least. I was very lucky to receive a community award from the Police Guild a few weeks ago. And there was a very nice piece of glass, molded glass, and for community service above and beyond or whatever. And for holy catfish. And there's an engraved catfish in this piece of glass. And I thought, well, this is just too good. This is too great.
I was at that event. That was fun to see you get that.
Yeah, that was terrific. We had just actually flown back that morning from France, so I was like, I didn't know what time zone I was in. I had no idea. Well,
we had no idea. Well, I think you did mention it, but your acceptance speech didn't suffer for it.
Well, thank you.
Great remarks.
I can. That's the breaking news part of me.
Yeah,
as Cito knows so well, that you get so ingrained in how you're going to prepare for those things. Interesting. I had a producer at KIRO, Jake Wiedrich, who's now at Channel 13 as their news director. We could see this in him years ago, that this guy was on an upward trajectory. He's a very smart guy, very good people person. We were talking one day here a few weeks ago, and he said, I tell my anchors the Steve Raible rule about breaking news. And I said, oh, you tell him what you and I used to talk about. And what I tell him was, I read a book by Peter Jennings many years ago, one of the great anchors of all time, and how he did breaking news. And he learned this from his father, who was a radio news guy, about the onion and about starting at the center of the onion with the facts that you know, and then slowly peeling that away, and makes the picture bigger as you go. It consistently gives you more to talk about without having to constantly say the same words over and over again. If your first shot out, you just do everything, then where are you going to go now?
Yeah.
So, and then you can add to the story, and it makes it more compelling as you go. So I just told him that I was going to do that, and he tells that now to his anchors. He said, and that's sort of how I do what I do. I try to hit the play hard. Here's exactly what happened. And then in the next breath, kind of expand on that central thing a little bit and then turn it over to Dave. And then if Dave, he finishes, if I have a second before the snap, one more
you
tidbit.
can react to something he said.
Yes. And then we're off to the races.
Yeah.
The biggest part for me is just play-by-play is you got two main jobs, down and distance.
Right.
Those and clock.
People need to know where the ball is.
And score. Exactly. You need to, is the ball on the left hash mark, right hash mark, or is the slot to the right side of the field or the right side of the field, just so they can picture it. Pat O'Day was such a help to me when I first started doing this. He's the one that got me to, he said, my first year, I would just say, touchdown Seahawks. And Pat heard it, called me, sat down with me. He said, why don't you try extending the Seahawks a little? Or extending the touchdown a little bit. Touchdown Seahawks. He said, and it gives energy to what you're doing, and it just sounds better than just playing. And he was absolutely right.
Yeah.
So his kind of influence as well was really important to me in how I do the mechanics of the job. And the rest of it is just the love of football. Going back to your question, I love fall. And yes, I'm a homer. I want this team to win. I work for the team. My job is not to say that they did something really bad, although I'll say, hey, they screwed that up. You can't throw an interception in that situation. You can't give up an 18-yard pass on a 4th and 16. You just can't do it. But that said, you can do it in such a way that it sounds like you've been there, done that, as opposed to you're being critical. And I try not to be too critical if I can help it.
So back to holy catfish. Do you have a certain criteria for when you pull that out and when you don't?
That's a very good question. That's very astute, John. By the way, you've been on TV more than I was when I was. Do you know that? You and the Pillow Guy have been on TV more than anybody I can think of.
We haven't even got to your KIRO
TV career. Well, that's all right.
So
we can leave that alone. But the when to use holy catfish, it's got to be a pretty good play. I mean, it's got to be something extra special. It's got to be. I didn't use it. I should have the other night when.
So you'll pull it out in preseason.
You could.
Yeah.
D. Eskridge takes a punt back, 70 yards or something, 79 yards.
Limited circumstances in preseason.
That deserved one, and I should have, and I didn't, and I kicked myself afterwards for not doing it. Well, I tell you why I didn't. We had a touchdown pass of 71 yards called back because of a penalty. So my first reaction was, as soon as he crossed the goal line, touchdown Seahawks, I'm looking for flags because I'm afraid that something's going to happen. And there was a flag. It just so happened it was against Cleveland and not us. So the play stood. But it's got to be a big play. It's got to be a Malcolm Smith interception for a touchdown in the Super Bowl game.
Yeah. You don't want to have to pull a holy catfish back because of a penalty.
No.
Have you had to?
I can't remember if I've had one holy catfish and then we get a call back.
Yeah,
I think I try to wait till it's a for sure.
Yeah, you need to know.
But it just and again, like you say, it can't be every touchdown. It can't be a 2-yard touchdown run.
Yeah.
But if it's like a beast mode run, that gets it. That's a hands down beast quake.
Yeah,
that gets it.
Speaking of Beast Quake, do you have a favorite call, favorite moment?
Yes.
That's probably a tough question. But
It's not.
No?
12s, they're bringing the trophy home. Your Seahawks, Super Bowl 48 champions. My favorite call I've ever done, word for word.
Yeah.
I've talked to play-by-play guys who they'll say something on the air, I'll hear it, and like at the end of a game, and I'll say, oh, that was pretty cool. He said, oh, yeah, I wrote that down before the game. You write your ad-libs down? And he said, well, yeah. He said, I don't know, I might not feel it the same way at the end of the game, so I want to be sure I have it if I need it. I've never written anything down at the end of a game, especially at the end of a Super Bowl, and you just react to what you're seeing. And that was the reaction for me that was the most honest and the most moving, because when you've been with a franchise from day one, first practice, to see
an expansion
your
team.
Guys holding up the trophy finally after all those years. That was, to me, the simplest thing I could say, and yet for most people, me especially, was the most meaningful. The Beastquake one was one that got a lot of attention, and that's, those plays aren't that hard. it happens right in front of you. I get excited just like the fans do, except I can't swear like they do in the stand. But I can try to put words to what they're thinking and how they're feeling and what just happened on the field. And that's what makes it really, really fun for me.
Is there like a biggest flub that sticks with you? Of a missed call or like I wish I didn't characterize it that way.
In the following year, the Super Bowl down in Arizona, on the interception in the end zone. And I was certain we were going to score. I mean, I was certain we were about ready to get a second ring. And by the way, thank you, Paul, rest your soul, for giving me the first one.
Yeah.
And Pete and Todd, those guys.
There it is right there.
This is my Georgia Tech.
Okay. Yeah,
no.
It's like they're bigger than that, aren't they?
This is Georgia Tech Hall of Fame. This is one I hardly ever take off.
The Super Bowl ring's in a case somewhere.
It's in a safe.
Okay.
Yes, where it will stay. And probably they'll find it there long after I'm dog food. They'll find this and who left this thing here? In that Super Bowl game. So the drive is coming down. Remember, Kearse makes this unbelievable catch on the sidelines.
Yeah, unbelievable.
And then Marshawn takes it down to the 2 or 1.5, something like that. And so we break the huddle. We come out. We line up in a slot to the near side. And I'm literally above it. Our position in the Arizona Stadium, the big toaster, I'm in that corner of the end zone. So I'm looking right down on it as opposed to, thank God, because if it was at the other end of the field, I could have never seen it. But everything happened right in front of me. And so I saw the play develop, and I saw Russ 3 steps, fires that shot in there. And my reaction was something like, Russ drops back, looks right, fires a shot. Oh, my God, it's intercepted.
It was like, oh, no, I remember that now. Now that you recount
the exact phrase was, oh, my God, it's intercepted. And I thought right away, I don't even have a priest, but if I had a priest, he'd have been on the phone. That we don't need that kind of language, Steve. We need to be better than that. But that was what my heart told me at that very second, and so it wasn't necessarily a flub. I don't know how else I would have done it.
Yeah.
But I could have done it better than being as surprised as everybody else in the building. But we all were.
You were channeling.
You look at
Seahawks Nation.
Look at the picture of Richard Sherman on the sidelines with his face.
And
his face just literally fell.
Yeah.
And Pete took his headset off and threw it down on the ground and just, hands on his knees. And that's the game. Game's over. Yeah. You have a chance. You're down there, and you have a chance to win, and you throw a pick. And I will never disagree necessarily with coaches on plays, why they call things the way they did. I agree. I saw they loaded for bear at the line of scrimmage. They had every fat guy they had on their sidelines up at the defensive line of scrimmage. So if Marshawn was going to get in, the guys up front were going to have to fight like hell to get him in there. On the other side of the coin, it wasn't a perfect throw. It was a little bit high, and it wasn't to the. I didn't think it was to the right guy. I thought we should have had a guy like Doug Baldwin or Kearse as the inside receiver, because those guys made those catches in clutch situations more than Locke did. And there were a lot of things that could have changed. The execution of the play was not good. I didn't think the idea was bad.
And Butler made a pretty good play on the ball.
He made a great play on the ball, and they had prepared for it. Yeah. And that's exactly what you do in this league, and that's why, no matter how great coaches are, the new guys coming in, there are other guys over there that are getting paid a lot of money to make you look bad.
Yeah.
And so, take all that stuff, all that preparation, work hard at it, but some of it's a little bit of luck too.
Yeah. It still hurts. Okay, moving on from that. You retired from the news desk in 2020. Do you miss it?
I don't. Yeah. I haven't missed it a day. Part of it was because I retired, and it wasn't COVID, was still kind of at its zenith then.
What month in 2020?
July. Wasn't it slowly kind of actually, it was still going pretty good.
We had a little ebb.
Yeah.
Right before.
Because I know that was election year, and I was at home for the last 4 months of work in my dining room with a camera set up and a tapestry in our dining room behind me. It was the dumbest damn thing you ever saw. But, and Dave Wagner, of course, our former cohort at KIRO, who's now in Tampa as their main anchor, great guy, funniest human being, gave me so much crap about the pictures on the wall back there. And Monique was in the studio every day. She was by herself. And that was just kind of the way we did it. But no, I don't miss the daily grind of it. I do miss the big stories.
Yeah.
I miss the big breaking news. I miss the things that we really did well at our high point, which was not the last couple of years before I retired, because we had sort of given up the franchise then. But the Seafair franchise, I loved doing Seafair. I loved, and Sharon said, "How can you love spending an entire weekend out there on this tower and watching boats, and it's hot and it's noisy, and the parade with people, throwing stuff at you guys down the street?" I said, "It's community. I love the fact that we're out there with everybody, and every age, race, creed, color, denomination. We're all there enjoying part of what the Northwest is all about." Those things I really missed. But the day-to-day stuff, no, it was time for a change, and they probably saw that coming too. I don't think I'd have been there much past when I was. I think my contract had another year to go, and so I probably wouldn't have been there much longer. It's such a different business now. When I started in '82, it truly was a license to print money in those days, and it's now. Stations are just kind of hanging on because there's so many choices and people just
so
don't
much
watch
disruption in that space, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's amazing how it's changed in just a couple of generations.
Is there a most memorable moment at the desk for you?
There are some. I was asked that question as I was leaving. They did all those goofy stories on me when I was leaving, and Monique had to front them, and I know it was one of those things that really grated on her. Like I don't.
This isn't in my contract.
That's right. People might want to know that James Cito is her husband.
Our
he's standing right
producer.
there. Yes, and he's standing right there, and he knows that we used to give each other so much.
Wonderful spouse, Monique,
much
your
grief.
longtime colleague at KIRO.
That's right. But there were. I didn't, I think, understand the scope of the COVID pandemic when it was happening. I'm not going to get political about who didn't tell us it was a very big deal and how it ended up being a really big deal and how 1 million people died and all those sorts of things. But so that was obviously something that happened once in a lifetime, once in 10 generations. And I probably should have said more about that. But in the time when I was actually at the desk from about 92 till 2020, there were so many stories. But ones that I specifically remember, unfortunately, most of them are bad news because that's kind of the business we're in. But I'll tell you, the one of the top ones was a very good news story, at least in my estimation, and that was sitting on the set, and we're doing live coverage of the election of 2008, and on the big screen beside us, CNN had just called it for Barack Obama. That was something. That was one of those things that you said, holy smokes, this is a time in history that, we'll never see this again. There's always got to be a first, and this was it. So that was pretty amazing. But everything from the earthquake, that thank God no more people got hurt or killed than did, but the Nisqually quake, and a lot of these things, the years after a while, they just sort of, I think, 9/11. Yeah. We were on the air. The network would go 45 minutes, and then the local stations would do 15 for about 3 straight days. And so I was on a wheel of like 12 hours on, and then I'd go home and rest for a while, come back, and then we'd be on every 15 minutes. And we'd be doing live cut-ins, and because so much had to do with military, and of course we're such a military-based enterprise out here in the Northwest, and then, just the fact that we'd been, attacked as a country and all that involved. So that was one. The Pang Warehouse fire was one that really got to me. 3 firefighters died in that.
1980.
It was in the late 80s, I guess, early 90s. No, it was more in the early 90s.
Was it early 90s?
Yeah, because I remember I did a number of live shots out there at the location, like the next day, and talking to other firefighters out there. And then they had the memorial service, and then the kind of not the parade, but the procession went right past the Seattle Center, which is where they had the big memorial service. And I was located live up on the top of the parking garage there, and basically broadcasting live from there as the procession was going by. And it's just all so moving and so such a waste of three wonderful people. The police officers in Lakewood who were shot, another huge story that we did for weeks and weeks at a time. I was there on the desk when we announced that we're going live to the King County Sheriff, Dave Reichert, who's got an announcement. We believe it's on the Green River murders, and he announced the arrest of the Green River killers. So a lot of the stories have those kinds of tilts to them. But I remember talking to Dan Rather many years ago when he came and brought the whole CBS Evening News crew out here, and they broadcast for, 4 days from KIRO. And he'd come around. He is and was such a terrific guy, hard-nosed reporter, good anchor, but a better reporter, correspondent. He would, I think, tell you the same thing. But he'd walk into our office. We're out there in the office. We're banging away on stories. I'm reading scripts. Hey, what's going on today? What's the news? What's happening? And we got to talking about the news. And one of the things he said was about why people tend to say, oh, there's no good news on. He said, well, if your audience is that guy who's across the fence from you in the backyard, and you both pull up together in the driveway every day at about 5 o'clock, you get off of work and you meet at the fence. Hey, John, what's going on? John says, well, the kids got home from school today and we had a great time, and the wife has dinner in the oven, and we're going to go see their grandparents this weekend, and I'm looking at buying maybe a new car. I haven't decided yet. How about you, Steve? Well, there was a guy who was arrested right in the middle of work today. We're not sure why. And then on the way home, I saw a terrible 5-car collision, and a dirigible crashed into the Space Needle. Now, which one of those stories do you want to hear more about? Do you want to hear the guy who everything was great, or the guy who had everything go wrong that day? That's just sort of who we are, and that's kind of unfortunately nature, at times, right? What our business is. So that's why a lot of my stories tend toward those ones that were big and somewhat sensational, and oftentimes considered kind of bad news. But all in all, and I'm sure I'm leaving out a dozen others that were equally memorable that I just off the top of my head, because of Jack Tatum hitting me back in 1979, that I don't remember very well. But that aside, it was. I enjoyed certainly what I did, and the ability, the opportunity to make sense of those stories. That's kind of really what it's all about. When the NAFTA, the World Trade Organization riots happened here, and the city was just a mess. And part of our job, we thought, was to kind of reassure people, listen, this is not the end of the world. Yes, this is happening, and yes, we've kind of made a mistake in one direction, and now maybe we're making a bit of a mistake reacting in the other direction, but this too will pass. And this city is one that's strong, and I've seen it now with the advent of and the passing of COVID, how much the city has had to come back. I keep a close eye on what you guys talk about, and how important it is to keep the city moving and to keep it moving forward as opposed to the other direction, and how best to do that. And are our elected officials doing all that they can do? Is our electorate doing all that they can do? Are they as informed as they should be? That's what our job is supposed to be, or was supposed to be, in the news business. At times we tend to get away from that, I think. But now that's somebody else's gig, and all I can do is try to impart whatever wisdom I have, which, as Monique would say, it ain't much, but I impart whatever wisdom I have left on folks that and tell them what I think is important, or at least meaningful to me.
Yeah. 2 closing questions, Steve, that we always put to our guests. Your first job that you took a paycheck for?
An official job.
Yeah.
Well, I worked when I was at Georgia Tech 1 year during Christmas. I worked at a sporting goods store in the suburbs of Louisville, Kentucky. We had a month break at Christmas time. Football season in those days always ended right around Thanksgiving. Our last game was Thanksgiving Day, usually the traditional game, Georgia Tech. And I was a freshman then at Tech, so I didn't play in that game anyway. came home. I knew I needed some money. And a friend of my dad said, hey, I'm always looking for extra help during the holidays. So I went down there and I knew nothing about working in a sporting goods store, selling anything, whatever. So they showed me what to do and how to operate the cash register and that sort of thing. My first day, I sold a complete scuba diving outfit to a woman.
Were you making commission?
I didn't. I should have. I think I was making about $2.10 an hour or something. But she came in and she was looking for like a pair of swim fins. Her husband would like this stuff. And I sold her a wetsuit, a belt.
In December in Louisville, Kentucky.
In Louisville, Kentucky.
That's impressive.
Goggles, the whole nine yards.
That's
impressive. The guy, the manager couldn't believe it. So I knew either she was very gullible or I had a way of selling things like I do now. Either it's a news story or a football story. But that was the first actual paycheck that I got. And it only lasted 4 weeks because then I was back at school.
Yeah.
And then my next paycheck was when I was working for a summer with a cable television company, one of the first ones ever in the country. And we would put cable into like a business, apartment buildings. We didn't do individual homes in those days, but they were used for not only closed circuit for security purposes, but I sound like I'm selling you on the job. But one of them that we did was in a hospital, a small hospital in Elizabethtown, Kentucky. And I was with a guy who was a former cop who was in this business because he got drummed out of the police force because he liked to smoke a little dope on the side. And that was probably not the best thing for him back in the early 70s. That stuff didn't fly. But we're working in this hospital and we're putting up brackets for the TVs to go in all the rooms, and then we're going to run all the cables to them. And the hospital administrator said, yeah, you go ahead. You guys are fine down in that whole hallway. Go ahead. My first shot with a big drill, a power drill to get through cement block walls. And it's, and somebody starts screaming, and it's a woman in the other room. They didn't take her out of her room like they were supposed to, the nurses. And she was recovering after her home collapsed on her in a tornado. And here I am blasting a hole in the wall with a power drill. And oh my God, I felt so bad. And my partner, I think he was hammered, so he didn't notice. But the administrator, boy, he took a lot of heat and gave the heat to the nurses for that. And we apologized. But I did get paid for that whole summer of work. And then my next paychecks were with the Seahawks. So I've had two employers since I got to Seattle almost 50 years ago. Full-time employees, the Seahawks and KIRO. And that's actually, I think, pretty good. It's made it easy work for my accountant, that's for sure.
And our closing question, Steve, your perfect Saturday in Seattle. What are you doing? I
did think about that. Jamie gave me a hint that you were going to ask that. And so I had to think about that, perfect Saturday. I love college football as you do and as many people do. But going and spending an entire day at Husky Stadium, there are other things that, because I'm all day Sunday, someplace else at a stadium. But a perfect day would be a late fall afternoon, end of September, early October, maybe with an earbud in, listening perhaps to the Husky game. But Sharon and I live on Queen Anne, and we used to live on the far north end of Queen Anne in a house, and we'd walk down the hill to the Montlake Cut, and we'd take our dog and we'd walk all along the Montlake Cut. And you could come all the way over to Elliott Bay, or you could go the other direction and walk out toward the Ballard Bridge. But we just loved it. Go across in Fremont and walk across on that side and just walk along the cut and look at the boats and just see all the folks that were out having a good time. And that to me is because it involves Saturday afternoon, nice day in Seattle, which we often have for so many weeks during the summer and fall, with my bride, with one of our dogs, which we've had a dog since we got married, and just taking in the physical beauty that is the city we live in. And yeah, people say, well, at Montlake Cut, it's all concrete and there's water in the middle, and how pretty is that? Well, it just is. It says what Seattle is. The greatest rowers in the world practice there. They ply their trade right there on the Montlake Cut. There's so much to love about where we are and what we do in the Ship Canal all the way along there. That to me would be a great Saturday, and then maybe stopping at a little place along the way and grabbing an early dinner if they let the dogs sit down at our feet or something, and then going back home, and the day would finish with me sitting at the desk working on my spotting boards, getting ready for the game the next day. And that to me is a pretty good way to spend a Saturday, and I've spent a lot of them that way, and I hope to spend a lot more of them that way.
Well, I hope you have many of those here in the near future as we wind down summer and enter fall and kick off the football season.
When we get to February and we're still playing,
that's right.
Call me up. We'll talk about it again and say, oh, yeah, we knew these guys were going to go to the Super Bowl when we talked back in August.
Right. That's right. And that goofy rule, we predicted it, how goofy it would be. Well, thank you, Steve, for making time for this and taking us through your time on the field and in the booth and behind the desk. And we could have gone on for hours. I had a lot more questions I didn't get to, but it's been delightful over the years growing up in this community to listen to you and watch you and have you in my ear. So I know many people share that, and we appreciate you making the time.
I appreciate it, John. Thank you. And I know this is going to all get cut down to about a 2.5-minute piece. I know television.
James is a ruthless editor.
He is. Yeah. He's a terror. He's a terror. But thank you. I enjoy it. I always especially enjoy. I talk about football a lot, but I enjoy talking about the community just as much, and how blessed we have been to be out here all these years, and for what you guys do to keep the community vibrant and healthy, or help to do that, and hold people accountable that need to be doing their jobs. So thank you guys.
Thank you. Well, hope you enjoyed my conversation with Steve Raible. That was a lot of fun. Really appreciate him making time. What a terrific guy. Now I'm ready for some football. I'm jazzed for the season. So thanks again to Steve for making time. I want to close out with a recommendation of what you got to check out in downtown Seattle. A few things here. One, just highlight the recent opening just last month of the Seattle Aquarium's Ocean Pavilion, an incredible new addition to the waterfront, now open to the public. Congratulations to the team at the Seattle Aquarium and everybody that was involved in bringing this great facility to our city. And speaking of the waterfront, a new escape room immersive experience will open at the end of October 25th to be specific. Tomb Raider Experience Seattle will open on the waterfront. You got to check this out, tombRaiderSeattle.com. It takes about 90 minutes to enjoy the full experience. It's at 1122 Post Avenue. It looks very interesting. If you're a fan of the Tomb Raider video game and film franchise, this is for you. And even if you're not, go check this out with your colleagues or your friends. Must be 10 to participate, and if you're under 16, you need to be accompanied by an adult. tombRaiderSeattle.com. Well, thanks everybody for joining us on this episode of Seattle City Makers, presented by the Downtown Seattle Association, with support from James Cito and production by Spark Creative.